So Cheryl, we've got 12 in now, and I'm mindful some folks may have registered but can't attend, and they'll get the recording. So whenever you're ready, just let me know and I will just start us off.
Sure. Well, why don't you start us off then, Paige?
Okay, perfect. As people roll in, I'll let them in. Okay, but we'll get started because look at that, it's 6:02. So hi everyone, I'm Paige. I use they or she pronouns, and I'm a volunteer with EC as the programming coordinator. And I'm happy to kind of introduce things here tonight and run some tech stuff in the background. So if you need anything, you can just message me in the chat. But I'd like to start us off today with a territorial acknowledgement, recognizing that I'm in Waterloo, Ontario, and this is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. And this is land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee as part of the Haldeman Tract, which runs 6 miles along both sides of the Grand River, which is, as it sounds, a really big river that runs through this region. So I would invite everyone to take a silent moment, or you can share it in the chat, to acknowledge the land where you are today, the people who have come before you, your own connection to the land, and your hopes for its future. And thank you everyone for taking the time to come today. And this is being recorded, so you will get that recorded. Sorry, I think my partner is blending something in the background if you can hear that. But I'm pleased and delighted to introduce Dr. Cheryl Picard, who is, you all know, of course, as the Emeritus Professor at Carleton University, one of the early pioneers of the insight approach to conflict and mediation. She has worked as a conflict practitioner and mediator for over 4 decades. Her strengths lie in being a pracademic, which means she skillfully facilitates theoretically informed, experiential, reflexive, and adult learning. Cheryl is the author of Practicing Insight Mediation and co-author with Dr. Ken Melchin of the book Transforming Conflict Through Insight. And I will turn it over to you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Paige, and welcome everybody. I'm delighted that we've got such a great turnout tonight. I've been trying to think about how do I, in my right mind, imagine that I can actually teach you skills, first of all, in an hour, and second of all, over Zoom. And so I thought I'm going to declare right from the outset that that's really quite an impossibility. So the next best thing I thought I could try to do is connect some of the, I think, most distinct differences about insight mediation and link it to the skills focus in some of those concepts. So that's what I thought I would do tonight. And we've got some wonderfully competent mediators with us who can help with offering their own perspective. Saying it another way is often very helpful for the learner, providing examples that to show what it is that I'm talking about. This is not scripted. We've got Marnie and Elizabeth, and they work with me, and Jennifer, they work with me quite a bit in terms of training. And so you are invited to engage with me as we get into the content of tonight. Yes.
Good. I just want to also just say that I'm happy to look at the chat as well. So if anything comes up in the chat, I'm very happy to just alert you to that so that you don't have to have that dual focus, if that would be helpful to you.
Oh my gosh, that would be so helpful.
Okay,
because I'm doing really good by doing my own slide presentation tonight.
Yeah,
so
I'm good. Very happy.
Thank you. Thank you. So, and people can feel free to ask questions in the chat or to make comments or to say you would like to speak to the group. So in some ways, like insight mediation, we'd like to offer you a engaging, emergent, responding hour together. And we'll see how that goes. I will also say that I've got a couple of larger training sessions coming up with EC in the next, within the next 6 months. There's a couple of them. And those will also have reference to the skills we'll talk about tonight. And there'll be more time because they're over 3 hours to be able to practice and work with them. So I hope that that suits people and that you're going to hang in and work with us in terms of that. So let me put the slide presentation on here. So the title of the session was gaining a deeper understanding of insight mediation skills. And I want to speak to that in the way that, well, I'm going to focus in the context of mediation and how these skills are used by mediators. I want to say that what we're talking about tonight and going through in terms of the concepts and the value that the insight approach has brought, not only to mediation, but to conflict coaching, to counseling, to having difficult conversations with your partner, your children, that a lot of the skills are life skills. And so you don't need to be a mediator to engage these and get a lot out of them in terms of being able to better your own life, whatever circumstance you're in, whatever conflict situation arises for you. So I think that's a really important point, that while we develop these in the early stages in insight mediation, because I'm a mediator, and because I was teaching people to be mediators, then it made sense to put it in the context, but it's not the only context in which these have value. So I've chosen 4 concepts to talk to you about tonight. And these concepts are interlooped and engaged, interconnected, and they move and they emerge, but they're distinct enough from other mediation models that I've pulled them out for us to talk about tonight. So we'll talk about how conflict is defined in the insight approach, how the insight process is one of engaging parties in learning, and we'll talk about what that really means and how we do that. That we recognize that conflict behaviors are responses more than intentions. That when people, when we look at what they're doing in conflict, we see that as a response to something. And that's going to lead us in the skill sets that we're going to use in asking about what are you responding to. And then the practice of deepening the conversation, the learning conversation, as the 4th sort of key element that I want to talk about tonight. Now, I should probably ask, I'm making assumptions, and I'm going to walk, if there's a problem with making these assumptions and you need to have some help making sense of what I'm talking about, you need to let Marnie know in terms of the chat, if you would, and we'll see if we can bring you up to speed in terms of that. But my assumption that people know something about insight, this is not your first exposure to some of these ideas. You may or may not be coming from a mediation perspective. I think some of you are, I know some of you, so you are mediators already, but may not have been trained in the insight approach. But that you all have some limited background in terms of insight. So I hope that's a fair assumption. And if it's not and you need some help, then please let Marnie know. Okay, Marnie? Yeah. Okay. So defining conflict, engaging parties in learning, recognizing conflict behavior as responding, and deepening the learning conversation. What I'm going to do now is go through those 4 elements and talk about the skill focus and give some examples of the skills. The first and foremost important, absolutely critical, important, necessary piece of or theory to understand is how we define conflict. Conflict in the insight approach is defined differently than it is in other mediation models. And we see conflict as people responding in a defend behavior to interpretations that leave them with the experience that the things that matter deeply to them are at risk, that they're being threatened in some ways, that they need to protect the things that matter. And so if you start at the bottom of this slide, you know, interpretations, assumptions, how we make meaning of people's behaviors or people's non-behavior, it creates in us the experience of the things that matter are being threatened, they're at risk. That causes, when things matter to us and we feel threatened about them, we defend, we protect them. We don't want to lose them, we don't want them to somehow be lost. And so we defend responses. I'll talk about in the next slide, but defend responses are things like explaining, arguing, convincing, basically everything we can do to convince the other person that they shouldn't be threatening us, except for listening to them. When we're defending, we're not listening. And so when we defend and we're not listening to the other person, for them, that's an experience that the things that matter to them are also being threatened. And so they defend. And so what happens is that over time, we get into these patterns. Our interactions, our communication patterns are one of defending. And the more we defend, the less we listen, the more the conflict escalates, and the deeper and harder it is to be able to deal with it. And we have this emergent, a very complex set of conflict behaviors that in insight mediation, that's what we're left to deal with, because people aren't able to do that on their own without a bit of help. So the idea that conflict is the result of defending against experiences of threat. That is something you have to hold constantly when you start thinking about these skills, when I talk to you about these skills. Okay, so the skill, so if you say, okay, people in conflict, it's not necessarily that they're struggling over interests or needs or personal goals. They're actually responding to the experience of threat. And as insight practitioners, in whatever context we're working in, we're curious about, I wonder what they're responding to. I wonder what they're imagining is happening. I wonder what meaning making they've attributed to each other that has caused them to have this very powerful experience of something that matters to me being threatened. And so when we teach insight mediation or the insight approach more generally, the first thing we want to do is be able to get people to ask open, threat-based questions that are they're very focused questions about interpretation, meaning making, what we call threats to cares, emotions, and valuing. But the key skill set is asking open. What's an open question? Again, most of you likely already know the answer to that question, but let me refresh it. An open question is a question that is not answered by yes or no. It is a question that tries to expand what is known, tries to expand information. So it's a what, when, where, how, and to a lesser extent, why question. So we ask open questions, threat-based questions, which are questions about the threat. So what is it that what is it you're worried about here? What is it that you feel that you have to protect? What's the worry? So we actually try to name, in some ways, using various ways, descriptors for what we call threat-based questions. How is everybody doing it? Can you nod and give a thumbs up or something to say this is okay, we're good? Okay, thank you. So in terms of defining how we define conflict as a defend behavior emerging from the experience of threat, that our first response, and whether it's with your partner, your child, is to ask about the threat. What are you worried about? What do you think I'm doing that's caused you to feel, that you have to defend against me, that we're in this conflict situation? What are you worried about? What are you imagining? How are you interpreting what I'm doing? How are you interpreting what I'm not doing? What meaning are you making? And so are you making of that particular statement or that particular request? That's the primary skill. I shouldn't say primary. It's something that I don't want to leave that's the only thing we do in terms of our definition of conflict. But what I am trying to accentuate here is that insight trained practitioners are trained to define conflict in the way I've been describing, and then to ask about that right from the get-go, to ask about those threats, those concerns, that fear, what people are imagining, what emotion that's generating, and how much this all matters. So we start not with asking, what's the problem? Or what are the issues between you? Or what's been going on here? We actually start with asking about the threat. And that's a significant shift from what other mediator trained practitioners would focus on in the beginning. It takes us down a different narrative. It takes us down a different path. And actually, I should say that maybe people could, is there anybody who is not trained in mediation? I can't see everybody. So yeah, Paige, okay. Are there others, Marnie, that are not trained in mediation? Can you see? Okay, so again, insight mediation, and I'm gonna defer back in a way. I was gonna say a few things just about what insight mediation is. And it is a mediation model, not unlike other models of mediation where we take people through, storytelling, helping them to come up with some possibilities for change, and then helping them to make decisions. It's a 5-stage process. We attend to the process in the beginning, broaden understanding, deepen on insights, explore possibilities, and make decisions. So in many ways, it's a similar process in some ways, but we're focused on a relational, interpretive view of human behavior. And so we ask about interpretation. We ask about the relational dynamics between people more than we ask about the problem. We use that to be able to help people solve the conflict situation. Okay, anybody need anything?
Cheryl, it's Jennifer. I was just going to ask, can you just define just for a moment what you would mean by relational dynamics? We do ask about relational dynamics. Just want to make sure I'm clear about that.
Well, it's not so much that we're even asking about the relational dynamics, is that we make the assumption that people are in relation to each other. And so everything that is happening to both or all the people involved. And so it's not so much about the relationship that people have to each other, but what happens between one party has an impact on the other. And we need to understand that, and we need to be curious about what is that impact. That's in some ways the interpretive relationship. Marnie?
I can say something here too, because Jennifer, that's a super great question, because it is not, like as Cheryl said, it's not so much about the relationship, but it's like, okay, so when Cheryl said, is that all there is? Then you responded, well, what did you think? And so then Cheryl kind of escalated, well, you never do anything here anyway. So there was something between the two of you that that generated this sense of escalating kind of defensiveness that felt like an attack that you had to respond to. So you're naming that pattern. And so when Cheryl did this, you did that. And so it's because it could be between you and the complaint department, or like with Rogers and Air Canada. It doesn't mean that you have some kind of like relationship with them. You may never see them again, but there's still something about the interactions that generated the threat and defend pattern.
Thanks, Marnie.
I'm also just doing that to encourage people to connect, that's so, Cheryl, you're so much sort of dynamic and responsive that it's really nice to have people engage. So that was great.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. So this idea that in the insight approach, our energies, our attention, our engagement with the parties is focused on helping them learn. The assumption is that people can't change their behaviors, their circumstances, if they don't learn something new. That's part of what happens for people to change. That's how change happens. It happens through learning. And so we use in insight mediation a interpretive learning process rather than a problem-solving process. So we don't look at the conflict as a problem to be solved. We look at it as an opportunity to open the doors to learning so people can learn something new about themselves and something new about others. And that it is through the learning and expanding what they know that they come to be able to make decisions about how to behave differently with each other, how to act differently, and not only with the party in conflict, but as they engage with other parties throughout their lives. So that it's a learning that actually is quite empowering in the way that it changes us forever. That's why we use the word insight. So what we're trying to do is to engage parties in a conversation that they can listen to and take into account in order to expand what they know and to generate new insights. And when new insights are generated, that's not something you forget. So it's not just understanding, but it actually is to engage in that powerful aha moment where once we have it, we can't even imagine that we didn't know that before. How did we miss that? How did we not know that? And that's how powerful insights are. And that's what we are as insight practitioners or insight mediators, trying to first identify where's the learning block, how is the learning blocked, and then how do we unblock that learning so people could start to hear each other. Because when people could start to hear each other again, they'll be able to expand their own knowing and then make decisions for themselves. So we have particular skills that help us to engage parties in interpretive learning. So we're exploring parties' storytelling through curious, non-judgmental, and layered questions and reflective listening. So this exploring storytelling through layered questions and reflective listening is a skill in insight called bridging. One of the things that you're going to notice as you work more with the insight method and the insight skills is we've named everything. We have a name for every single skill or activity that we want the insight practitioners to do. And that's our way of being able to communicate and say, okay, you got to do more bridging here. And you would know what bridging means. And what it is that asking questions that also include reflective listening. So you're really worried about whether or not you're going to pass this, get him to change the mark to be able to pass your test. That's a reflective listening piece, followed by a layered question. So what is it that you need to have happen what is it that you've done? What is it that you would like to ask or say? What would be helpful? So we make sure in bridging, what we've got is questions, reflective listening followed by a question about the reflective listening that takes us deeper into the particular story that the parties are telling. And of course, I'm saying storytelling in the most generous way. It's not that I think it's minimizing. It's not a minimizing, it's a maximizing of the storytelling of what's going on. So reflective, that the skill of bridging in some way, skill of bridging, layered questions. What are layered questions? Layered questions. And maybe we could do this example of this. If anybody wants to jump in with me, layered questions are questions. You ask a question, party gives an answer, and you ask another question about the answer to the question. And they answer that question, and you dig a little more deeply, and you ask a question about the answer to the question before. So you're never really broadening on the topic, you're actually deepening on the topic through layered questions. Some people call it peeling back the onion, getting to the core. That's what we're talking about here in terms of asking layered questions. And you can't, if you continue to just ask layered questions, it becomes a bit of a interrogating, and people are not sure they want to answer those questions. So that's why we've got the reflective piece that's part of the layered questions for the skill of bridging. Marnie?
Cheryl, so if Veronica's open to it, because it might be, so Veronica's made a point in the chat about this, the reactions that we all hold due to this like generational. So Veronica uses the word trauma, and it's a very important conversation now around trauma-informed practice as well as threats and being able to recognize where there's a threat being generated. So Veronica says that we don't understand in hindsight like why we react or say things in the moment. So that learning is a really important part of this process. So I'm just wondering, like, Veronica, if you're also open to like if there be that kind of the demonstration of layered questions in that may be another opportunity to demonstrate that. And you could like totally say no if that doesn't work for you, or if there's a technical problem. Okay, so Veronica says sure. So Veronica, are you able to turn on your mic and
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes like in the heat of the moment, like people tend to react without actually meaning what they're saying.
Yes.
Because it's like they block actually. It's just like for the sake of the arguing in itself, because the threat is like they are like attacking something that is important to me, or I believe is important to me. So they stop listening. So they just like react, just like I guess is the flight fight mode that kicks in.
Yes.
So it's important just like to dig deeper for them to start listening and take them out of that spot that they are at the moment, and like they kicking the like learning process, or not learning process, but it's more like the thinking process that kicks in. So that is when like the shift normally comes.
Yes, absolutely. Well said, Veronica. And what I'd like to do, maybe rather than do layered questions, Marnie, right now, is just to make some nice links to what, Veronica, you've set out there for us. In many ways, what you've described is what we're talking about, that people are responding, that in conflict, people are responding. So people who are upset, people who are in trauma, people who are, defending they're not open to listening. And so the first, so we have a skill called noticing. It'll come up in another slide in a minute, but this is an opportune time. We have a skill called noticing. And so Veronica, what we have to do is notice that. Whoa, this person is very escalated. This person is really attacking. This person is in a fight flight situation here. I don't need to be telling them what to do now. I need to let them know and acknowledge that I see that this is hard. And so we make statements like, whoa, this is really strong for you. This is really hard for you. You feel really frustrated by me or by this, whatever's going on. We need to acknowledge what we see in front of us. And we need to ask them then what would be helpful rather than telling them what to do. It's hard. It's hard to engage in this conversation with each other tonight. You feel strongly, I feel strongly. We need to find a way that we can talk to each other and at the same time listen to each other. And so, given how upset you are right now, what would you like me to say or do that would be helpful? Because I don't want to make it harder for you. I want to make it better. So there's an example of a number of skills that we would use in insight: the noticing, and not questioning the noticing, but acknowledging the noticing, recognizing that things are hard, and then saying, how are we going to do this? Because we both want to have this conversation, but it's really tough right now. So, Veronica, is that kind of touching on what you were touching on?
Yeah, absolutely. Like
Okay.
you need to, like I wrote it on the chat, I'm sorry, like they need to override the emotion, but for them to override it, they need to actually like realize the emotion first.
Well, I think they need to be in a field. Yes, they do. And they need to be in a place where they feel the person is listening. And that's
Absolutely.
That's the acknowledging piece. So it's not so much that the content of what they're saying is what they're, but they recognize that this is the level of difficulty. This matters to me. This is important to me. And that acknowledgement about the depth of caring about this situation that people have is a very important aspect of what we need to say and do to be able to begin this conversation. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we also have a couple of skills we call finishing and using. It really comes in when we're doing defending or deepening, where if you're going to explore people's storytelling and you're going to try to understand it from their perspective and the depth of their perspective, then we need to stay with them. We need to finish it. And this skill came about when I was teaching mediators, and there was a lot of talk going on in the mediation field that you had to have balance in the mediation. You talk to this person, and then you talk to this person, and then you talk to this person, and then you talk to that person. Well, the work that we were doing says that is not necessarily, when you're trying to really uncover something, the best way to go at all. In fact, it stops the ability for people to be able to talk with you in a way that goes at a level that really does matter to them. So we have this skill called finishing. If you're going to do it, finish it. Make sure there's no more questions to be asked. Make sure that you understand that person and they know you understand them, that you've done the verification. And then use the information that you've just gathered in some way to say, well, that helps make sense about why you stop the alimony payments, or why you slammed the door and walked out of here. I mean, now it at least makes sense for me about why you did what you did. That's the using skill. And then we're transparent. Again, these are not necessarily only existing in insight, but we're very transparent about our intention of what we're doing. I'm going to spend some time really trying to understand what matters to you and how hard it is for you to talk about that. So I'm going to I'm going to go slow. You and I are going to go slow. I'm going to spend time with you. I'm going to ask you questions. I'm going to notice if it's hard to answer those questions, and maybe we'll come at it another way. All of what I'm going to do and I'm doing is to try to help you let us know what is so so strong, so hard, so deep for you. So we use transparency a lot. We're just letting people know, letting the parties know, or the people we're working with, what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because when you start asking questions about feelings, people kind of like, why are you asking me that? Like, that's private, that's personal. Why are you asking those kinds of questions? And they don't understand, and they become protective against you. And so in some ways, helping to explain, you know, what you're doing and why and what it's about can help them to feel that they're in a safer place. Sorry, I keep moving this. Sorry about that. Okay. Elizabeth, Marty, anybody want to jump in on this, or shall I move on? I have two more to go through, so let me keep going.
Yeah, so Upasana has also made a good point about that. Sometimes parties can be very closed. And so how might you handle that? And then also too much probing might sound patronizing as well. So you've just identified the situation where the mediator's questioning may also generate a sense of threat and a decision to defend.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
What do you do then?
So then, okay, well, this perfect slide for this, Susanna. Noticing responses and behaviors. So we train ourselves and we practice to be exceptionally good at noticing what's going on with the parties. So in the case you've just described, if you notice that people are starting to get defensive against you, people are behaving in a way that they're coming back with defending responses. They're explaining what they've talked about. They're adding on to their defense. Then there's something
It seems like Cheryl has cut out. Is that so? There was an insight question. Okay.
Yeah.
We're deepening on the fact that she's cut out.
Yes. Maybe we can layer some questions around that just until she comes back.
It was an interesting, for me, the question was interesting because using insight in family mediation consistently, I've never had the response of, I think that they feel that I'm being patronizing, but I think that they could get defensive, which I think of as different. So just, I guess that word can be interpreted differently too. But I think that our overall approach is so clearly, we're transparent about what we're doing. So I haven't for that reason found that it's patronizing, but I have found some people are very closed and they're not, they don't want to go there. And we have to go, I think Kenneth Cloak says, you know, with permission. We can't just forge ahead when people are saying, you know, I don't want to answer these questions. Obviously that's a problem, but I'd be interested in what, did we lose Cheryl completely?
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in what she would say about how to handle that. So maybe Marnie or Elizabeth can tell us.
Elizabeth, what do you think?
I think this is a really, really important point. And what comes to mind for me, Jennifer, is the whole question of vulnerability. And as we are transparent and we are working with people, we are aware of how we are in fact asking participants to become vulnerable with us. And so I think that, you know, Cheryl often talks about the communication skills required of an insight mediator and the necessity to be really skilled in communication. And I think this is where we come in order to be transparent and to be aware of the necessity to create more trust so that people can be vulnerable. Because, you know, as Cheryl mentioned kind of at the beginning, it can be very difficult for people to share some of these very, very important details for them and the other person that they're for the other persons that they're in conflict with.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so important for us to say that to acknowledge that, right? To be transparent about how hard it is and to encourage them by that. So, yeah.
So Cheryl, just when you were
Oh, we
away,
got Cheryl.
yeah. So just when you, Jennifer made the point about, in her experience, never really having people feel patronized because of the transparency, and then that led to another conversation around vulnerability. So, and then you were also just in that space of like talking about noticing. So if someone feels defensive or seems closed, then the skill of being able to notice that also in a very open and curious and non-judgmental way just can then, that's what you were, just where you were at.
Well, and thank you so much. All of a sudden I've got nothing on my screen. So, and then to ask about it, so we notice it and then something happened here. I'm wondering what you're hearing me ask about or say. I wonder what it is that I'm doing that's making you a bit anxious, in terms of where this conversation is going. So let's again, slow it down. Let's talk about that. And the other piece, that's the bridging skill. The skill of bridging is another way that we don't end up with this kind of going at people and asking them question after question and making them feel that we're, interrogating them some way. So, so that's another way of Upsana, of stopping that pattern once we notice it happening. And so I say, I'm going to say to you, as I would say to all my students, it's not so much that we get it right the first time in terms of what we do, but that we notice how people respond to what we're doing. Because if we notice how they respond to what we're doing and we see that they're responding defensively, we know we need to change that. We need to find out about what that is and we need to change it. If we just keep doing it, all they're going to do is go further and further back into their corners.
The thing that I would add in that too is just as Elizabeth was saying around vulnerability, and then also that it can be a threat if there really is genuine attention on what matters to people.
Yes.
For some people, that may be some of the first times that's been asked. And then to be able to, because I've had people say, I'm not going to tell you my feelings. And like particularly students who have, that as they know that's an important, can be an important window. And I said, yeah, that's fine. You've already told me, like, just from what you've said, I really understand that the situation upset you because you had been really expecting this and then that happened, which then really, and then people are very happy to continue to tell that story once I've started it, if it's on that note. That kind of framing of it. It's that genuine curiosity, the genuine willingness to follow, no pushing, there's permission being significant around, like you can then come in and fill the story again as we move along. And so that's another way of noticing with the transparency of openness.
Well, and think about it. And so I do see your hand. Just want to pick up on Marnie's. Think about it in this way. We know that people don't like to be in conflict. And so we know that people will respond with true and genuine, authentic listening. And so if we offer that to them in the kinds of ways we do it and the skills that we know are useful to be able to demonstrate that, people will respond to it. And it's the thing that they've asked you, particularly I say to mediators, people are paying you the big bucks to help them. So for goodness sakes, don't make it harder for them by making them feel defensive. We need to help them open up and get into a space where they're safe enough to be able to share what really does matter. Because that's the only way they can make a difference in their lives. So I see your hand.
Thank you, Cheryl. So I'm sorry I was 10 minutes late. I did not realize the time difference. It is 4 a.m. in the morning here in India.
Oh,
So that's the passion. Having said
that's
that.
the passion, yes.
Having said that, my question is, in insight mediation, do parties are they allowed to involve advocates in the process? Because then opening up and trying to understand the true intentions of the parties, is it easy in the presence of advocates in the process?
Well, clearly it makes it, it's clearly different, right? They're not speaking to each other. I mean, we generally, so it's not a clear yes or no. Yes, of course they can. They can, it's their process, and we have to be creative with that and flexible. But there is a how. It's not if, but how do we work with the advocates? How do we work with the other people in the room? What role do they have? And so there is some pre-work that needs to be done to make sure that the parties get to do their own talking. People bring people in as advocates, in my experience in the beginning, because their experience in working with a mediator or some other helper has not been good. So they're adding to their defense, right? And so when they don't need the defensive, the defending people to defend for them,
Right.
they can talk. That's why because we don't use a caucusing model. Now, we can caucus, we teach you to caucus if caucusing is necessary. And in some situations, you can't bring people to the same room for violence and all kinds of very good reasons. Obviously, we respond to that as well. But in general, we try to have people in the same room because that's the only way the incorrect interpretations are going to be discovered. I'm not going to know what they're interpreting or what meanings they're making. Only when they hear it and hear it in a different way are they going to notice that that's not what I thought this was. They're going to pick that up. The helper person can't pick that up. Marnie.
I would also say the way that Cheryl's slides framed the beginning of it is really significant, is that if the effort is to learn more, to recognize that learning has been blocked, and it's not necessarily to advocate a particular position, then it can help to situate the advocate where their role is that recognizing there's been communication that's been blocked. And so it is likely more helpful to hear from the parties themselves, and that the advocate can be there as a support, but they're not there as the spokesperson because they don't have the immediacy. Just to be able to, again, frame it is if what we're trying to do is to create more understanding and support learning so that the parties can have a different conversation that's been blocking them, that can sometimes really help to situate different roles and overall goals.
Yeah, and just again, think that there is a purpose to the conversation. There's a purpose to having that dialogue. So we want them to have the dialogue so that they can figure out how to resolve this conflict. It's not that we just want them to learn and, well, we're learning, isn't that great? And this is all that it's about. It is this idea that if people are able to talk together themselves, they're better able to find a way to deal with that situation that's better than anything I could imagine. And that's one that they're going to follow through on. It's going to be more lasting. And it's something that they learn to be able to do in the future, not just in the present situation. There's all kinds of benefits if we can help people to engage in the dialogues themselves rather than our engaging in the dialogue and telling them what to do. That's the thesis behind the methodology in terms of what we're talking about. I want to mention one more skill. There's a couple more, but I think the one I'd like to mention, and then we'll have a few more questions if there are any. But this idea of listening to the listener, and you may have come across that in reading or in learning that you've had about Insight, this idea of listening to the listener. And I think it's a powerful addition to mediation work. We all know, we learned, active listening, where you really listen attentively to the speaker, and you're working really hard to make sure speaker's understood and the other person understands the speaker, and that's the activity. Well, when you think about people are defending, what is the message that's largely happening, certainly in the early stages until you've had time to do any work? It's all defending. And if I make sure that the other person hears the defending, what am I really as our pattern of interaction describes, what happens is that it just makes the other person not only have to defend back against the original party, but now against the mediator too, right? So it's not that we don't use active listening, we use it in bridging, we call it reflective listening, but we do listening to the listener. What's more important for us to make sense of what's happening in mediation between the parties is that we discover what is it that people are interpreting that is leading to the behavior. How do we make sense of the behavior? You make sense of the behavior by finding out what people are hearing. So when she tells you that, this won't ever happen again, what are you hearing her say? What does that leave you with? How do you take that message? Because that's the piece of information that's much more useful in helping them to find ways of interacting with each other that's going to have the follow through and it's going to have the desired end that they're looking for. So this listening to the listener, we're constantly asking, what are you hearing? What is it that what are you taking away? What are you taking away by the way she's talking about this? What is it? What meaning does that have for you? All of those interpretive, meaning-making questions that we ask to discover what's going on in people's heads, because what's going on in your head is going to dictate what's going on in your actions.
So Cheryl, let's do it. Like if for an example is that if what I heard when you asked me the question of what did I hear Paige say, and I could then say, well, I heard them say, I'm an incompetent parent.
Okay.
So
Wow, that's pretty hard to hear. And Paige, is that what you're telling her?
Well,
Is that
no,
what you want her to know?
that's not what I meant at all.
Yes. And so we could continue this and do a little bit more, but that's precisely what happens. That people interpret the wrong message, particularly so in conflict situations. Almost always, well, I shouldn't say almost always, but a lot in conflict situations, there's that misinterpretation. Now I get to work with you. Okay, so that's not what you're telling her. Let's try again. What is it that you want her to know that's important to you? Let's try this again. So you get a chance to tell her, Marnie, now what is it that you're hearing Paige say? Is that different? Is that the same? Does she have it? Marnie will say, well, she's telling me this. Okay, does she have it now? Is this what you want her to know? And is this all you want her to know about that?
And I guess I also wanted to say that too. So because Oksana said is like, could we continue it as a demonstration? Because one of the challenges of asking, what did you hear? Because when Cheryl, you say sort of, we do continually ask that. It's also being able to assess how well are the parties listening to each other? And so that is a good indication. If I continue to come back to Paige with like, well, they did say that I returned the kids late, and they did say that the kids had junk food. And so what else am I to believe? But they think that I'm incompetent, which is why they always drop off the kids late. So
what is it that our theory would tell us now about what Marnie just described? What is her learning is blocked. What's my job? My job is to unblock that learning, because she cannot continue to have a dialogue with Paige with her learning being blocked. So you're right. Marnie, that we use it in some ways to also test about whether people are listening. I'm going to turn my light on. When I moved here, I don't think you can. You're right. I'm right here, so don't go worry. We'll see if that's any better or not, maybe. So our jobs are to open the block learning channels. So people can have a dialogue where we, through our process, are able to verify that they now do understand each other. They do have it. They have the
convinced. Yeah, and sorry, Cheryl, but when I'm convinced that Paige is just trying to attack me, then I'm not listening to her at all. And that's what Cheryl would have been able to tell if all I have is defense. So,
yeah, exactly. And those are, but, well, she's just saying that because you're here. Lots of excuses, lots of, like she just, oh my God, all the nonverbal, all that kind of stuff that goes on that is indicative of people defending.
Exactly. Just as it says in the chat about coming up with different reasons to prove that I'm right.
Yes, exactly. Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Absolutely. and so I need to deal with that. So I need to recognize, so we need to acknowledge it. So this is hard. It's hard to imagine anything different than you already know. And it's hard for me to find a way for her to talk to you so you can see something different, that you can become curious about that, or at least ask about that. So Marnie, what is it that Paige would need to do or say different than she's saying now to tell you that she's really trying to have a conversation and trying to open it up? What would that be?
That's a golden question. And so then I would be able, then that really does like require me to think in a way and say, well, then I think Paige would need to listen to what it's like for me.
Yeah. And that's what's not happening for you right now. And so if she was listening to you, what would she be doing different, Marnie?
Well, I think that they would not be like always criticizing me, but they would be also like actually like trying to hear something about what it's like from my point of view, to have to wait half an hour before they drop off the kids.
And if she heard how difficult it is with dropping off the kids, what would she be doing? How would you know she's heard that?
Then I would know that they're like actually, well, even just saying sorry.
Ah. So Paige, what are you hearing her say about that? What is it that she is looking for to be able to gauge that you are listening?
Yeah, I think it seems like Marnie is feeling criticized and hearing my responses as criticism. And I think she wants to feel understood and that I understand the hardship that she's going through, which I do. I can totally appreciate that. I think it's frustrating for both of us. And an apology and maybe in recognition.
Marnie, did she get it?
Yeah. And I'm also sorry because I have to leave like right at 4 for a class that's about to start. So this is a very timely moment. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you for being there. Thank you, everybody. And we'll be talking more. I guess that's all I can say. Is there anybody that needs to say anything before I guess we've got a couple of minutes.
I think I really like the part because I didn't know about that every stage, every skill is named. So when we talk, it's easier to explain and remember and use it as a tool. So
yes.
While it is bridging or layering. So, or when you know what you're doing, I think that is one thing which mediators face a problem at, because what are we doing? If it's a skill, so it's not limited to summarizing and paraphrasing and reframing.
Yes, absolutely. And not only is every skill named, every skill is directly embedded in the theory that we use in this particular approach. And so they're theoretically, linked and grounded so that you can count on them in that way, and you can understand them in that way, and you can make those direct connections. So
Cheryl, I used an insight approach in a conversation lately. So I remember if I have 1 minute, I just want to share that with everybody. So shall I, Jennifer?
Well, I don't know, Jennifer, did you want to say something?
Oh, it was just a question that's separate though. So go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. So there was this conversation I was having with somebody whom I want to come for a fireside chat with my organization. So since Cheryl has mentioned, maybe one of the recordings I saw something that it is not only restricted to the mediation process, the entire approach is related, it can be learned as a life skill, you can use it. So, and Cheryl always say, take a step back and look at the larger picture, then we will get in. So I was trying to explain, me and my colleague, we were trying to explain what we intend to do in that 1 hour. So in the process of discussion, we started layering, and there was this point that we did not understand what the entire session will be about. So Cheryl popped in front of my eyes, and then I said, take a step back, then we will take take a broader view and then come and go into the specific areas. So that helped the entire conversation. So at that moment, I realized I'll share that with Cheryl.
Thank you. Thank you. Jennifer. And Veronica has their hand up. So
Just a question, Cheryl, and I maybe should know, but I just want to make sure I understand. So when you are in that last example, there's a shifting point from the did she get it right, and no, she didn't get it right, and you're going back and you're trying to get it sorted out, and it shifts to the and I didn't catch exactly the sentence you used at this moment, but it shifts to the almost like I'll call it like the what do you need to hear. So there's a difference between those two. I think it happens sort of seamlessly, but is there a difference there? Because it's shifting from I feel criticized and they're saying I'm incompetent. Is that what you meant to say? No, and what is it that you did mean to say? And then it shifts. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, actually, let me make the link back to the theory piece. The concept is normative patterns of interaction. So it's not asking what she should do. It's asking about, there was something in her mind that if she were getting it, or if she were doing it, or if she would behave differently.
Yes.
And it's a normative or an expected pattern. We all have them based on our value systems and our worldviews. And so you're not seeing what you would expect to see. Mm-hmm. What would you have expected to see if in fact she was doing what you want?
Okay. That was it.
It's the expected pattern. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Veronica.
Sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. Like, this is like a question, and knowing that you're going to be mediating like a high conflict like situation, would it be wise, or would you recommend just to, at the beginning, when you explain why we are here and so on, that there are not going to be winners at the end? Would that help, or would I actually like inflame the whole situation? Like, because like normally people comes to the meeting knowing that this is what I want and I'm not going to leave here without getting it.
Yeah, well, you see, and that's the different theoretical premise in which we're working from. So I don't look at winners and losers as a concept in terms of this. They're both going to win because they're going to learn something new. So I don't talk about it in that way. I think we talk about it in, what's going to happen here is that things will change. You'll broaden your perspective of this situation because you're going to understand each other better. And that's going to help you to make decisions on your own about how to get out of this situation that's going to make you feel good. So I don't talk about it. So it is the negotiation model that we do not use that has winners and losers.
We know that, but they might not. They might not.
You see, okay. So we do a convening or a pre-mediation. We meet with everybody individually, and we talk about what's going to happen, the kinds of questions, what we mean when we talk about learning. You're going to learn something. Well, people don't understand. Absolutely, we have to explain what it is that we're talking about, so people are expecting, because we want them to do the thinking part of it before they come. What really matters, and what is it that you're worried about? What are you imagining? Those are the questions I'm going to ask you, not what happened or what you want or what's fair or any of that. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question, because I didn't get a chance to mention that. And it is an important element of insight mediation that we do pre-mediation work beforehand. Yeah, absolutely.
And you will do caucus too if needed, right?
I will do caucus if needed.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. In some ways, I guess we're trying to say we do face-to-face primarily because there are models that do mostly caucusing, and that is not what we believe is the best way to proceed in a mediation.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. Anything further? Good. Well, we're a bit over our time. It was so nice that you jumped in and joined me. I feel it was a bit jumpy, but hopefully useful. Thank you. And we'll see you maybe at some more of the EC. And thank you, Paige, for for coming on and facilitating this and being there for us. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, thanks. And lots of upcoming programming. I just threw in the chat that Dr. Picard is doing, and there's many, many others, so check out the website. Thank you so much, Cheryl. This was really, even as somebody who's not trained in mediation, this was really interesting. So thank you.
Good. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
You.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.